Good morning to our friends on the West Coast. Good afternoon to our folks in Mountain, Central, and Eastern Standard. I guess good morning also to any Alaskan or Hawaiian guests that we have. We're so glad that you could join us here today. Welcome to the Cultural Policy Action Lab. It's session 7 of 8. We're so excited you could join us here today and hear from all the brilliance that is CARE Lab and also our guests from Creatives Rebuild New York. Just as a bit of wayfinding, Q&A will be happening throughout our time together today. You can put any questions that you have as we hear from our guests in the chat. Also, captions are enabled. This session will be recorded and posted on the Grantmakers in the Arts website on the Cultural Policy Action Lab page. And there will be an opportunity at the conclusion of our time together today for Q&A with the guests, which we're very excited about. So we're glad that we have you with us. My name is Randy Engstrom. I use he, him pronouns. I come from the unceded territory of the Duwamish and the Muckleshoot, the Coast Salish people in Seattle, Washington. I'm glad that I get to spend this time with you today. I'd also like to introduce, well, behind the scenes, our collaborator, Estrella Escalin, choreographer supreme. And also, I'd like to pull onto the stage now, my friend and colleague, Jen Cole, another of the architects of this Cultural Policy Action Lab experiment. And Jen will introduce a little bit of the session today. Jen,
hello.
Welcome.
Thank you, Randy. Hello, everyone. My name is Jen Cole. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming to you today from the unceded territories of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla bands of Chinook, and other tribes that created their homeland once and forever, also known as Portland, Oregon. I'm going to welcome you today to the Cultural Policy Action Lab. The Action Lab is a collective and collaborative space on a national learning series and professional development community of practice program envisioned for public sector workers who seek to advance racial equity through arts, culture, and public policy. We are really excited today to present the seventh part of the sixth session in this learning series. Today, focused on individual learning support for artists. As you can see, the Cultural Policy Action Lab sort of examines key structures and cultural policies functioning in the United States and seeks to unpack them through new and alternate ways to advance racial equity. So I'm really excited and we'll turn it back over to Randy.
Thank you, Jen. While we do our individual acknowledgements, we also want to sort of set the frame and in the spirit of action in the Action Lab, try to get to push a little harder on the acknowledgement. And so even in this time of COVID-19, when we're all physically distant and dispersed across the US, we would like to recognize that we are all grounded and connected to Grantmakers in the Arts, our hosts and our funders of this project, which is located on unceded Lenape land. This acknowledgement is meant to be a means to recognize the history and the legacy of that colonialism that displaced the first people there, and where we are speaking to you from today. We're all connected to sanctioned and unsanctioned policies and continue to benefit from that legacy through our compensation to facilitate this session today. In addition to shifting policy in the public sector, which is why we're gathered here today and what we're here to discuss, a beginning step in the work to dismantle our own internal and structural colonialism beyond this territory acknowledgement is to support these tribes and these communities in this critical time through resource and financial donations. For your information, please check the links that Estrella is going to put in the chat. The NDN Collective, Native Women Lead, First Peoples Fund, and the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation. Please consider getting beyond the acknowledgement and putting resources towards these important groups. And with that, thank you. I'm really excited to introduce our friends that will be our guides today for this conversation. The brilliant folks at CARE Lab, Mallory Roxana Nazem, Johanna K. Taylor, and Amanda Lovely. Collectively, they are the CARE Lab, and they are going to be talking to us today about individual artist support. And what we believe in the context of individual artist support is that public policy and the arts can be more just and impactful than it has been historically, fostering community wellness, racial equity, civic narrative, and belonging. We believe that this work is done by training civic leaders to center artists, change makers, and community self-determination in the imagination and implementation of public policy. We recognize that historically, the vast majority of resources have gone to support institutions, and recently, we've seen more of an emphasis on supporting individual artists. That's what we're going to explore today. And I can think of no better guides to explore that with than our friends at CareLab. So with that, I would like to invite Amanda, Mallory, Roxana, and Johanna to the stage.
Thank you for the passing of the baton. I am Amanda Lovely, one of the members of CareLab, and as an artist, I'm very excited about this topic. So I'm going to start us off today talking about individual artist rights support and our key takeaways. So what we came up with was that you need to start with artists. You need to bring artists into the planning and focus on what artists' needs are, because they're unique to different artists and different communities. Also, we need to collaborate outside of the arts. Artists no longer work in a bubble and are collaborating outside the arts, and so should funders. And we really think that working with cross-sector agencies could help create some really unique ways to fund artists individually. And lastly, we're building off pre-existing models. Again, this isn't new. There's been things that have happened across history that have shaped how artists are funded. And we want to kind of dive into that, which is a great pass to my teammate, Johanna, who's going to share a bit of history with us.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you to GIA, Randy, Jen, and Estrella for this invitation. We are really excited about this topic and feel like there is energy around the country now to get re-energized and motivated around what we can do to move things forward. We're seeing a lot of great ideas come up that we're going to share with you today. But we felt like it was very important to do kind of a quick regrounding in what this country has done. This is a very abridged history, sort of giving us some context that taken together really show that there are some pre-foundational models of what we've done to support artists in this country that we can use to inspire our work going forward, and also to show that there's a precedent. This is not a new thing, that artists have always been foundational to creating this country as it was and as it can be moving into the future. So one big example that we've heard a lot about over the past couple of years was the launch in the 1930s of the Federal Art Project, which was a part of Roosevelt's Work Progress Administration. There was a 25% unemployment at the time, and of those 15 million people, nearly 10,000 were artists, which is a huge number of people and a huge labor capacity. So during that time, artists received a set wage and benefits. This structure was modeled after the unions, which were really taking off at the time. People received set wages and benefits, infrastructure to complete set projects. So this meant working on murals. This meant arts education and community centers. This was across the board, recognizing that art was a part of everyday life in America and could support people moving forward. At the program's height in 1936, there was more than 5,000 artists employed in the program, which is a lot of people. So from there, that sort of set this foundation of work around the country that inspired then the launch of the NEA and the NEH, and National Endowment for the Arts and the Humanities, both established in 1965 by Congress and President Lyndon Johnson. This was different than the WPA because the goal was not to provide work for unemployed people, and it was also intentionally not aligned with a political agenda. The quote on there is from a report that the NEA put out about its history, saying that they were not established to solve a problem, but to embody a hope. And that hope was about bringing culture to the people. And in order for that to happen, that meant supporting artists who were the instigators in creating that culture and connecting culture with community and cities around the country. So a core integral part of this was a fellowship program that the NEA ran over the next 30 years, where they granted individual fellowships to artists for their work. Often this meant to artists individually, such as visual artists and creative writers. They also had a track record of funding dancers, which meant funding their nonprofits, which were organizing those dance companies. Next slide, please. So that lasted for a while until I feel the other bubble moment, which we often talk about, is the culture wars, where tension erupted over how funding was being spent and what it was being spent on. So getting into that territory of the intention of the WPA or the NEA to not be politically connected. And then it became political questions around what the money was being used for. Should it be supporting artists' artwork such as Robert Mapplethorpe and Andres Serrano, which resulted in ongoing conversations leading to boycott from Joe Papp's Shakespeare in the Park program to famous artists also deciding to not participate and receive funding from the federal agency in response to their choices. So out of those tensions, the NEA ended most of its individual artist fellowships, with the exception of creative writing, and continued to fund organizations. Similarly, state and local arts agencies primarily have been funding organizations during that time, but they, in response to the NEA's shift in priorities, work to try to support individual artists by specifically supporting projects. Next slide. So this chart shows you what state arts agencies have been funding over the past decade, or a little bit more than a decade. And you can see that in terms of individual artist grant making, there has been a slight uptick in terms of number of grants made, the dots at the top of the line. So from 2,300 in 2011 to 2,900 in 2019, and also in the increase in the amount of money that's been given. So again, this isn't big money. It's not a ton of grants compared to the number of artists, but there is evidence of a focus to fund more individuals. Next slide. So this slide shows you how much has been awarded in that last year of this of when the data was collected in 2019. So you can see that even though there is an uptick or an increase in support for individual artists, it still is a really small percentage of what these state arts agencies are supporting overall. It only represents 13% of all grants given, and only 3.7% of the grant money. And we all know on this call that increasingly every day, $2,500, this median award, can't go very far in terms of supporting work, right? So it shows that there's still room to grow, even though the trajectory is increasingly in this direction. Next slide. So this shows you kind of what has been funded. The main takeaways from this time period is that, again, it's focusing on individual projects and not general support. So unlike how the WPA was structured, that was giving a stable set income to artists, it's focused on project support, and that requires funds to go out in lots of directions before artists can support their bottom line of living day to day. Next slide. Okay, so similarly, local arts agencies, only a small portion of the funds are going to individual artists. So this shows you, again, in 2019, that of the almost 40 million requested, that only 8 million was able to be awarded, which means only 20% of requests are funded. And again, with local arts agencies, that grant is also a little bit smaller. And again, the rest of the funds, similarly to state arts organizations, are focusing on organizations and public art and other ways that art is connecting with cities and communities. Next slide. Okay, so out of this context and background, this brief historical overview, we see a solid foundation and trend in these government institutions and in the American public overall that is desiring to support artists individually. So we see that there's a need out of this to intentionally extend support, not just to organizations, but also to artists. We're seeing that this is what state arts agencies and local arts agencies are wanting to do with the limited amount of resources that they have. So we want to recognize and highlight that. And we also see this as connecting back to some of the intentions and motivations that were foundational in terms of how government support was being directed to artists in the US over time. So out of that context and this agenda, we have two different foci that we are kind of sharing with you today. This first one that I'm going to present briefly before passing it off to my colleague is about creative workforce support. So we see this as kind of one way in which new responses are recognizing this history, looking back to the WPA model, all these calls about cultural New Deal and other concepts, that we are recognizing that creative workers are valuable and are contributing to the support of our day-to-day infrastructure and our humanity and our collectivity as a people. But we also see that creative workers are precarious and that they face economic instability and racial inequities, which is leaving the nearly 5.2 million workers in the US in a precarious position. They're primarily working gig work, which means that it's difficult to come by some of those stable benefits and stable salary that can support a person day to day like they have in other sectors. Okay, next slide. So we've identified a few ways around the country in which policies are evolving to recognize the instability of the creative workforce and trying to provide some infrastructure which can enable artists to do the work that they do every day, which can further our society and communities further. So one of those things on a federal level is the Creative Economy Revitalization Act, which was announced in 2021. So this was strategically a bipartisan bill, so uniting a Democratic representative from New Mexico with a Republican representative from California and receiving 175 endorsements from across Congress. What Representative Teresa Leger Fernandez said about it was that we know that art and culture is what makes a city and a town a community. So I want us to build back beautifully. They recognized that this was a unique strategy. The goal of this is to create a workforce grant program within the Workforce and Innovation and Opportunity Act, so to connect creative workers back into stable jobs. Also strategically, it was a partnership administered by both the National Endowment for the Arts as well as the Department of Labor. So back to one of our overarching themes that Amanda introduced, this is connecting arts and non-arts agencies and sectors together to kind of get more of a stable ground for how policy can be enacted. So it was modeled after the WPA intentionally, and it was with the goal of supporting projects that was going to support the community at large and be publicly accessible. So similar to other government grant models, this also distributes funds to eligible government, nonprofit, and for-profit organizations rather than to the artist directly, so that then funds can then get to the artist through this partner. Next slide. On the state level in California, the California Creative Corps is underway and has recently made an announcement about their next phase. So this is an exciting thing to continue to follow as it evolves. Again, this is also modeled intentionally on the WPA, and the goal is to promote public health awareness and social justice through civic engagement. So this was a one-time $60 million appropriation. They are re-granting that to 14 different organizations across the state that are intentionally geographically distributed in order to connect with their local communities and reach as many people as possible. They just announced last week or the week before who those organizations are, so that then the next phase will be they will be redistributing it, and that 60% of those funds will go to individual artists. And again, this is also promoting targeting social justice and public health. Next slide. Also then on a local level, I feel like the local level example, increasingly over between federal, state, and local, people are more able to respond to immediate community needs and recognize their partners across their government, broadly speaking, and also local community nonprofits in order to be more agile and responsive. So I think that's an exciting takeaway from this one. Minneapolis was able to see the challenges that their community had been facing over time, given the murder of George Floyd during the COVID-19 pandemic, and was able to immediately redistribute funds that had been repurposed from the police budget. So the city council decided to shift almost $8 million from police funding to other areas of the government. The arts and culture received $150,000, and they were able to pretty quickly over the course of a month shift that funding to 10 different projects around the city. So directly to artists doing 10 projects using the Arts Midwest as a fiscal agent. So again, community liaison and operating in a responsive way meant that they were able to immediately shift money to artists such as this Haircuts for Change project, which is in the photo. And this program has continued on in 2021 and 22, and some of the artists that were funded in 2020 were able to then serve as advisors and strategizers supporting artists that are doing the work in the past couple of years. So looking across these three examples, we see how the desire to look to the WPA is continuing and evolving. And we also see that this strategic partnership with other agencies and organizations enables work to happen faster and enables more funding to get out the door more quickly in order to get in the hands of artists. We see that this is also part of a larger trend to shift this into being an artist-led process, which we're very excited about, and connects to the next example, which will be shared by my colleague, Mallory Nizam. Take it away.
Thanks, Johanna. So this next section is a bit of a case study about one particular strategy in cultural policy to support artists, which is guaranteed basic income and universal basic income. So what I'll be sharing is just kind of diving deeper into that topic, but also framing this as really building, as Johanna said, on this opportunity at this moment in time. And for us, this moment in time really has been the way that COVID-19 has changed society and kind of offered a new lens for us to look back at wicked problems and the current challenges at the policy level. So we can go to the next slide. So guaranteed income work is not new. It has been built on a legacy of other movement work. It's rooted in economic and racial justice work, and some of those building blocks include the Black women's freedom movement in the US and a lot of civil rights era work, including the Poor People's Campaign and the Black Panthers 10-point platform. Next slide. So on a national level, one of my questions when I first started looking into this is, how can we make the argument that artists in particular should be targeted for guaranteed basic income and universal basic income? Data shows that artists are 3.6 times more likely than other workers to be self-employed, which means there's, a different kind of job security in self-employment. And then artists tend to have a lower median income than the national average, which also makes them a little bit more economically vulnerable of a population. Next slide. So if we zoom in from the national level and just look within the community of arts and culture practitioners, we see that inequities that exist on a societal level continue to exist within the arts and in some ways become more amplified. For example, white artists have more education access. And I cite all my sources at the bottom if you want to see those. So 80% of artists with art school degrees are white. And then women in the arts tend to make less than men, 79 cents on the dollar. Next slide. So again, this opportunity moment, zooming in even further to this moment in time in the pandemic, there's been some really amazing nationwide data collected. I know that AFTA, you see cited here, Americans for the Arts, has led some of that data collection. There's been a lot of local data collection as well. So we found through that research that about 62% of artists became unemployed at the height of COVID-19. About 95% reported a loss of income, which is almost every single artist. And that 80% had no recovery plan. We also know from other data that around a little more than a third of artists did not have retirement savings. So it sort of tracks with that recovery plan as well. So this was clearly a moment in time, and we had data collected within the field to put on the table and say, this particular group of folks, artists, and then if you overlay the inequities societally that currently exist, that more marginalized populations within the arts population are really going to be in trouble right now. So what can we do about that? Next slide. So one of the ideas is to work with universal basic income and guaranteed basic income, and specifically target BIPOC artists and artists of other marginalized populations, artists living with disabilities, and LGBTQ+ artists. So what is UBI and GBI? I'm going to use the acronyms now. Thank you for adding those in the chat. So some simple ways to think about it. These are cash payments that are periodic, so they're rhythmic. So it's not just, I get this at the beginning of a year like a tax return. Maybe I get it monthly. That they tend to be universal. So in this circumstance, it was a little bit more targeted in the example that I'll show you, but there are also models where everyone receives this, that they are individual. So it's paid to a person, to an individual person, and that it's unconditional, which for me is really a key here, which makes it different from a paycheck, because it doesn't require that I perform labor. It doesn't often require anything. Of course, there are different models, but it doesn't have conditions. So I receive this regardless. Next slide. So in a nutshell, this is the definition, at least from the case study that I'll be showing you. So guaranteed income is an economic model that provides regular, unconditional cash payments to individuals or households with no strings attached and no work requirements. So I think that this attempts to decouple financial support from labor. So it's the difference between labor and living. It's giving living costs instead of saying, you're an artist making a work, I value your labor and I'm going to pay you for the labor. This is saying our society is organized inequitably, and in order to right that a bit, this is something that everyone deserves. And in these circumstances, that there are targeted populations that we really need to give this guaranteed income to. Next slide. The larger framework that these basic income programs operate within is that they're trying to tackle, as I mentioned, some of these larger issues that plague our country and our world. And I like this visual because it shows how a lot of these challenges that we face socially, economically, politically are connected to UBI. So UBI is connected to the economics, obviously, to race, to work. I used the word labor, automation, health, gender, democracy, and I'm sure you could add more things to that list. But it really is taking into account how all of these systems impact our lived experiences, and it tries to offer some sort of balance to tackle these issues. Next slide. There are, I think this is from Mayors for a Guaranteed Basic Income, which is a great organization if you do not know about them. But this is just a sense of where these prototypes or programs are currently happening. So you can see that they're geographically, they're fairly spread out. There's obviously some places where we don't see those programs. The blue dots are the concluded experiments where they've already run their test program. And then the gold or orange kind of dots are where they're currently active experiments, and that data is since May. So you see 104 experiment sites. So this is definitely, I would say, a moment in time right now where we're seeing a lot of experimentation and a lot of testing of the different ways to run these programs and really studying their benefits. Next slide. I want to highlight one program in San Francisco that was led by Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, which I'll now call YBCA. And you just see some basic statistics here. They had almost 200 artists, 2 programs. The payments were dispersed over a year and a half, $1,000 per month, and then over $3 million were dispersed. Next slide. So they specifically targeted particular populations within the arts community. So they, through their research, they decided we're gonna target artists that have been hardest hit by the pandemic. And particularly through our data, we are seeing that these populations, Black, African American, American Indian, Alaska Native, Latinx, Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, LGBTQIA+, disabled and immigrant communities, showed that they were hardest hit by the pandemic. And so those were the folks who were really prioritized in the funding. Next slide. So another organizing block to make this happen was the Creative Communities Coalition for Guaranteed Income. There's a typo in there, but I think you get it. So I just wanted to show this to give a sense of the kind of folks who are, it wasn't just YBCA, but who also came together to make this a reality. So we see a lot of different, we see cultural centers, we see the transgender district, we see arts venues, theater companies, even press shops or printmakers coming together to recognize and to recognize this issue and then to realize the program itself. Next slide. These few slides are just a sense of who was funded through this program, or I shouldn't say funded. I think that's maybe not the right word. Who was supported by this program? Who received the monthly stipends? So 19% were immigrant artists. About a quarter identified as Hispanic or Latinx. 95% identified as BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, disabled and or immigrant. 17% Black or African American. Next slide. So further stats, you see 10% are American Indian or Alaska Native, 3% Middle Eastern or North African, about half are LGBTQIA Two-Spirit plus, and then 17% are Asian or Asian American. And then we have I just have one more statistic, next slide, that less than 1% are Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, and a little over half are disabled. So this is the data that YBCA and the team behind this pilot collected. So you can see that a lot of different populations were served, and we're not just targeted in the outreach, but we're actually served by the program. Next slide. So what did they test? What did they find? So they measured the impact on low-income artists' housing stability, very key, their employment, their financial stability, and their creative capacity. That last one I find really interesting. And I am not sure exactly what that data collection looked like, but I know a lot of us in the field are often thinking about what does qualitative data look like and how do we capture that? And I think this is a particularly interesting area. They also collected data on the particular how this program mitigates displacement or interacts with the impacts of displacement, which we know in a city like San Francisco is just massive. I lived in the area and I saw it firsthand. It's lost a lot of its creative population and working artists. And then lastly, the full findings and impact are to be shared in the summer and fall of 2023. So we don't yet have, all of the data to share out because they're still in process. Next slide. So some of the preliminary recommendations that they've collected is that UBI and GBI programs are going to need to be designed differently depending on the source of funding. So this is starting to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of how these programs are set up. And so one of those questions is, are these dollars going to be private or public? And that public funding, there may be equal protection clauses that interact with targeting demographics specifically for funding. And so those are some challenges that with public funding will need to be sussed out. And then I love this bottom recommendation. They recommend that you join or start at a really local level, local communities of practice and working groups to start to navigate the funding landscape before, jumping into a topic that is really exciting right now, but really starting at the local level and thinking about what is the funding landscape around you and how can you build off of that. Next slide. Another key recommendation, again, it's nitty gritty, but it's about tax status. So considering what will the tax status be of these cash payments for the recipients and also for those that are administering them. In the pilot in San Francisco, they used the IRS's charitable gift status, and you can learn more about what that looks like, but they should not, under a charitable gift status, it should not be taxable if they're offered in recognition, if they're not offered in recognition of services rendered. So it's different again from like, you did a service and I pay you. This is a totally different model where it's not about a transaction of labor. And some pilots have even applied the IRS's disaster relief status during the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are some benefits to that. And then they also just note that because this is a newer experiment, that it's important to just think ahead that you're going to want to have legal compliance support, and that needs to be part of the timeline and the budgeting. Next slide. So public benefit is that. I think this is actually the same slide. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So here, these programs are, so that was just a bit about how YBCA, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, is piloting their program, which is, really targeting the artists who are hardest hit by the pandemic, who are artists who come from marginalized backgrounds and artists who have historically been under-resourced. And we see these programs in other cities. So in St. Paul, Springboard for the Arts has piloted a program there. Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. It does not target artists, but it's where we see a coalition of mayors around the country starting to do this at an elected leadership level, which I'm super excited about. Down another map of where we're seeing programs popping up. And then the last thing I'll note is that one of the more recent programs to offer guaranteed income is Creatives Rebuild New York. So in the New York State. And we are very excited to have our wonderful guest speaker joining us from that program, Mara Cuffey Peterson, who is the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Guaranteed Income. And Mara's going to offer us one more case study, a look inside the program at Creatives Rebuild New York. So I'll hand it over.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Is my sound okay? My internet, I got a little,
You're good.
Thanks, Mallory. I'm so excited to join you all, and thank you, Jen, Randy, Joanna, Amanda, Mallory, GIA, Estrella. The squad is intact. We love it. Mara Cuffey Peterson, I'm calling in from my living room. I live on top of a subway in the unceded land of the Lenape people in the Flatbush neighborhood of Brooklyn. And it's always fun where I live. So if you hear fun going on, it's because I live in a fun place and there's music and things happening outside all of the time. I think one of the things I wanted to, so I'm here to talk about Creatives Rebuild New York and the Guaranteed Income program in particular, but there's other stuff going on that feels like it hopefully adds some inspiration to two of the big things we're trying, both what the history that we got from Joanna earlier, thinking about workforce development, but also thinking about guaranteed income as well. So I will share my screen and get started. So fun things. Creatives Rebuild New York is a 3-year, $125 million investment in the financial stability of New York State artists and the organizations that employ them. We really are thinking about how might we catalyze systemic change in the arts and cultural economy, recognizing artists' contributions to reshape society's understanding of artists as workers. I feel like that's what we're all here to do. That's what we're here to talk about. Before, I was going to say a little more context about some of the things that artists have faced, but I feel like that's been so brilliantly organized and shared before, so I'll skip over that. Slides aren't clicking. There we go. We have two experiments, if you will, that we're testing out at Creatives Rebuild New York. An artist employment program, which absolutely is inspired by and harkens from some of those earlier policies you heard about earlier, and I'm sure you all talk about often, CETA, WPA, all those cool things, and more recent things like the Sierra Act, et cetera. And then a guaranteed income program for artists. So this is incorrect. We're talking about jobs and no jobs. The artist employment program is about jobs. The guaranteed income program is about no jobs. I love what you said, Mallory, about work and livelihood, right? How do we sustain those things? I'm going to spend a little bit of time first on the artist employment program. The artist employment program is 2-year salaried employment for 300 artists, culture bearers, and culture makers who are in collaboration with 99 community-based organizations all across New York State. I should say that community-based organizations here is really broadly defined. So we're also talking about municipalities, we're talking about agencies, we're talking about artist-led organizations, we're talking about community-based organizations in the traditional sense, neighborhood-based stuff, et cetera. This program is designed for organizations, right? It's broadly defined, who want to work with artists, right? And for artists who do their work by, the nature of their work is about community. The program itself is trying to attend to this known but somehow invisible fact that the trickle-down funding ecosystem has not worked for artists, right? That funding organizations doesn't necessarily lead to artists being able to have full, robust, sustained income, right, over time. So instead, what would it look like if our arts organizations just employed the artists, right? What would it look like if instead of going project 1099 basis, we had artists, a lot of them, right, getting W-2 employment that lasts for 2 full years? These collaborations, I think important for this program as well, is that the artists and the organizations came together to apply. What is the work that they would be doing in these jobs? Well, the idea was that the artists and organizations would propose it, right? And their application was joint to begin with, right? The idea was that the work would need to both support the artist practice, the organization's mission, as well as community. It's sort of a many flowers bloom approach. The work doesn't have to be new, but it also didn't have to be old. The most important thing was about reciprocity, mutuality, and shifting power, which I understand is also a big theme of this fellowship in this webinar series. How are we using policy to shift power? Redistributing wealth is one of those means of doing that, is a tenet in both of our programs. we are now in a place, CRNY, I mentioned, I hope that we're a 3-year initiative. We're in the first year of those 3 years, and we are now in a place where those 300 artists have begun receiving their first paychecks, which is really, really cool to see. We're New York statewide. I think a lot of folks, maybe not folks on this call, but certainly, unfortunately, some folks I spoke to said, oh, there aren't artists outside of New York City. Like there aren't artists in all these other regions. We're really happy to share back that all of these nuanced, beautiful, different, regions have artists of color, have disabled artists, have artists who are parents, who are neighbors, who are caregivers, all of these things. And these collaborations you can see on this map show up everywhere. The range of the collaborations, what's happening in the work that they're doing is really broad. Some of these collaborations are about teaching, some of them are about public programming, some of them are about advocacy campaigns about a specific issue. Some of the collaborations are with farmers, right? Some of the collaborations are with theaters. It's a big mix and really exciting to see what's going to come of it. One other piece about these collaborations that I think is interesting to note is that how artists do their work may or may not fit into what other folks think of as a full-time job, a 9-to-5 at a desk doing the things. Some of CETA's model landed on what they called a 3-2, right? 3 days of work in an office or with an organization, 2 days of work focused on the practice. In this program, we've invited the artists and the organizations to propose what that time delineation should look like. It's exciting. I think many of us outside of the arts even are thinking about what should work look like now. And I think this program is going to tell us a lot about the different ways that artists do their work and maybe other ways that other folks should be thinking about work as well. Briefly, guaranteed income for artists. Mallory, you said so much about the history. I think it's a lot of people know about guaranteed income or universal basic income from Andrew Yang's campaign bid some years ago now. And the truth is it really comes out of Black movement leadership, right, over decades and decades, which is important to note as the beginning of what guaranteed income is, what universal basic income is. It's really about saying people deserve an income floor. People deserve livelihood, no matter who they are. I think everyone on this call knows that artists are those people too, right? Artists face the precarity of gig work, right? Of wage theft, of uneven incomes, et cetera. Creators Rebuild New York's guaranteed income for artists program is serving 2,400 artists all across New York State with monthly, no strings attached cash payments of $1,000 a month for 18 months. Yerba Buena Center for the Arts that you heard about a moment ago are our besties. They're our best friends. There's tons of really cool guaranteed income programs happening all over the US and all over the world, as a matter of fact. And there are very few that target artists specifically. We are one of the largest programs in the US operating at this scale, both in the volume of people that we're supporting, but also geographically. A lot of programs are city-based. What's interesting about our program is that we have the opportunity to see what guaranteed income could look like for folks in rural contexts, which I think is really important when you're thinking about cultural policy, right, arts policy, and all the reasons why we're on this webinar together. A couple of other things about our program. We're right in the middle of it, right? We're doing the thing, we're getting people paid. It's waves of payments happening. Stay tuned. Later this year, we're going to have a big press announcement about our program and who's in it and what we know so far. There are a lot of considerations to make when implementing a guaranteed income program. And there are tons of really cool folks, such as Mallory put this, the Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, an advocacy group trying to get mayors of towns all over the US to sign up and create pilot programs in their places. Guaranteed Income Community of Practice, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, Springboard for the Arts did a small program as well. Lots of considerations to make. But the simple thing is that it's about trusting people who are in need to spend money on their own terms. It mimics income and the regular payments, but it is not income. It's meant to supplement benefits. We need them all, right? In our program, folks are getting paid through direct deposit, through prepaid debit cards. We have, it's important at this scale to understand the many, many intersections of oppression that people experience in life, also are experienced by artists, disabled artists, trans artists, Black, Indigenous, folks of color artists, artists who are caregivers. I used that before because that's a big one that's come up for us. And therefore, how the process is designed, how people receive these payments also needs to be carefully considered. This is really not grant making. The big, I keep saying big, but it's all big and exciting to me, at least. A big difference between a guaranteed income and other sorts of ways that artists are more familiar with receiving compensation is that a program, and most guaranteed income programs and guaranteed basic income programs are not merit-based, right? So it's not about deciding who's the best artist who needs the money. It's saying artists are deserving, their artwork is important, right? And you ought to be able to have a livelihood regardless of what kind of art you make. Our selection process was a randomized weighted selection, not merit-based. That's a really felt like a really important principle from the guaranteed income landscape for us to apply to our work and to our program. We had over 22,000 people across New York State apply to our program for 2,400 slots. I don't think there's a way you can judge 22,000 people based on the merit of their artwork and their artistic practice, nor do I think that we should. I do know that that number is important for us all to hold, that there are that many artists who are in need, right, of this kind of funding. The second bullet point is just to illustrate that partnering with other social service agencies, particularly for the many folks on this call who are civic minded, because it's not grant making, it's more akin to a social service or benefits distribution program. And so there are a lot of partnerships that should be considered and thought of before launching something like this. And then finally, just honoring the agency at each step of the process. And the agency I'm referring to here is artist agency, participants agency. The whole spirit of a guaranteed income program is trust-based process. No strings attached, right? No conditions, no reporting is really important. No setting it up so that the payments are classified as a gift so they can make the tax exclusion before April 15th comes around. Making sure people, if not assuming that people have bank accounts, not everybody has a bank account to receive direct deposit, all of these things that make sure that our people have choice in how they are a part of these programs. So second to last, just wanted to quickly summarize. We have sort of two experiments that we're operating at Creatives Rebuild New York. We're in year one. Our artist employment program has 300 artists, right? A $65,000 salary for 2 years with organizations. The work itself that's happening is co-determined by the collaborators, the organizations, and the artists themselves. Our Guaranteed Income for Artists program is supporting 2,400 artists and all of the stuff I just mentioned. And I'm going to pass off to whoever I'm supposed to pass off to. Thanks all for letting me share a bit about our work.
Thanks, Mara. I think you're handing it off to Amanda.
Hello, I'm back again. It is me. So thank you again, Mara, that was really great. And thank you, team, for all the great presentation. I feel like I've been looking at it for weeks, but I learned a lot hearing it all. All right, so we just wanted to give one more shout out that the 9th and final event is Care Lab again, and it is us talking about artists in residence and cultural strategists. And we just think that this is another opportunity in relation to what we just talked about, but also different. So we want to invite all the people on this call to the September 14th presentation. Next slide, please. So we're about to jump into the Q&A, but before we did that, we wanted to invite all of you, after hearing everything that you've heard today, to think about some different partnerships in your own community and what could be possible. And maybe that is within a government agency and an art org, or maybe it's cross-sector in a whole different way that you hadn't thought of before. Maybe you got inspired. So yes, the chat is enabled. And so feel free to, in the chat, share your name, your title, your location, and maybe a partnership that's popped up as you started listening today and thinking differently about the work that you do and how you fund artists. And then we will transition to the Q&A. So I'll hand it back to Jen and Randy, I believe.
Thank you all so much, Mara and Mallory, Roxana and Amanda and Johanna. Every time I'm in your company, I'm excited and inspired. I would encourage everybody to leverage the prompts that Amanda just offered and sort of put your ideas and thoughts in the chat. I think that because we archive this for other folks to see and read later, your responses and your ideas are also sort of rich for the rest of the field. And this is meant as a collaborative space and a co-learning space. So would love to see your thoughts. One of the things that we want to pull a couple of questions that popped up from the Q&A and sort of send them back to the panelist participants. There were several questions around sort of, particularly around the GBI pilot, sort of how you sort of set up the sort of process. And Maura talked a little bit about kind of how you were randomized. I think there were some questions about YBCA too, about how you sort of determined that the process actually centered the very people that you were trying to support. And so I wonder if a couple of you could take what you know about these processes to make sure that we really are serving BIPOC artists, disabled artists, GLBTQIA and rural artists, the most affected by income instability.
I'm happy to say a couple of words.
Go for it.
Okay. I was doing the seeing if you were gonna get in there first. A few things. We operated a lot of guaranteed income programs and universal basic income programs are organized around a research experiment, right? So they're actually a randomized control trial where you're trying to collect a sample and then a control, right? So you're doing a true experiment, right? They're partnered with universities. There's all sorts of consent forms, et cetera, et cetera. And within that process, often organizations are partnering with local community-based groups so that they know that their outreach is effective. Our program is not designed that way on purpose because we believe that the research is clear. There's a lot of research that shows this works, and we want to get this money to artists and learn from them how this does or doesn't work for them. A few things. What we did in our outreach strategies was that we, one, convened a think tank of advisors before we even got started to see what are some of the things we should consider before we launch, before we open applications. So these are artists, researchers who have the whole range of life experience of the folks that we hoped would apply to our programs. We also had a help desk, literally, right, where we partnered with an organization, Good Call New York City, so that people could call and get the help they needed to apply. We also worked with both a language justice consultant and a disability justice consultant prior to launching applications, and they're folks that we lean on pretty heavily as we move through these processes. We adapt a lot, right? We learn a lot, and sometimes we don't get it right. Working at a scale where 22,000 people are applying, and we have a team of 7 now, at the time smaller than that. It's also true that you can do what you can do, and not everything is going to work for everyone, but it's really important, I think, holding care as a principle and care for people who aren't you, right, is, I think, just essential tenet in how we did that work. And there's lots of ways to do it, of course.
Thank you. I didn't know if any of the other Care Lab folks had anything else to add. Thank you.
I'll add, I can add a little bit about YBCA's eligibility criteria. I did not work on it, but just from my research. So in their reporting, in their like test and find section that I showed at the end, they talked a lot about the nature of public funding. So their funding was public funding, so they could not restrict the funds by race or any group. So they could not say we're only going to give, we're going to give 50% to immigrant artists. They had to use proxy indicators to kind of approximate some of that information. So they note that the Department of Housing and Urban Development has some guidelines around an income qualifier, and they also use zip codes. And the zip codes that they prioritized were those hardest hit by the pandemic, and they determined some more criteria around zip codes based on community input. So that's, is a little bit tricky, but they ended up that the data that I showed you about who actually received the funding, it's not that they hand selected those people. If you became eligible to receive funding, you were randomly selected from that pool to receive funding. And that's about as much as I know about their criteria. But again, that full report's coming out in about a year.
I can add, just because I talk to YBCA people a lot, we're always sharing notes. I know also the first round of funding, exactly like you described, Mallory, and there's a lot of conversation in the guaranteed income sort of space around how to do proxy indicators in a way that's not demeaning and as honest. So zip code is one that's used a lot. The Stockton seed experiment is often quoted, one of the first guaranteed income programs in the US. But there are one thing I'm curious to see, other models I could see in the culture space, arts and culture space, would be sort of anchor institutions, right? And having community-based organizations, some sort of space between randomization and knowing who in the community, right? Scale stuff is always interesting,
Good. We had a question about research. So like places one would go to research. I know that Mayors for Guaranteed Basic Income has a good kind of research page, but as you all were doing this work and have gone to places for this kind of research, what are some top line things that you would recommend for others?
I mean, Care Lab for sure, y'all. All the stuff you all do and think about and other research you put out. There's an awesome group called the Basic Income Guarantee Big Conference, and Income Movement is another space that's thinking about this in big, meaningful ways. The Guaranteed Income, I'll pull up some links. The Guaranteed Income Community of Practice is a community of practice, right? So it's hundreds of folks who are thinking about how do we do this and what does it mean? If we wanted to do this for undocumented folks, how do you do it? Where do you start? If you want to do this for artists, what do you do and how do you start? And then of course, all the interesting workforce development people thinking about the creative sector, and thinking about the creative sector and also thinking about the benefits cliff is like something we didn't even wander into, but is a big part of both creative workforce development and guaranteed income space. LEAP Fund is a place that has both collected research and is thinking about coaching in different ways. Probably a million. I have the list somewhere, and I'll start dropping links as I find them.
Anyone else?
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I think the main thing here is that we're really encouraging people to draw the connection between all of those links and organizations that Maura just mentioned to the arts specifically. Like we see artists as benefiting from all of these programs. And so even though there isn't necessarily like the sole place that is talking directly to artists, I think Creative Rebuilds New York and YBCA and these other places are becoming those resources, but that we really see all of these other field-based programs as being connected and wanting to work with the arts and culture sector, and that now the opportunity to take advantage of that.
Great. I'm going to pivot to a couple of questions that have cropped up in the chat. So Devon Nichols from the Greater Columbus Arts Council wants to know, do prepaid debit cards assist artists with government assistance limitations such as disabled veteran or retired artists? And are there other strategies for using these types of cards that you found effective?
It's complicated. I don't think I can answer the question straight on, although I really wish that I could. In our program, we knew that we wanted to offer choice as much as we could to folks. Not everybody wants a debit card. Some people really do. Some, like I mentioned, a lot of folks are unbanked, right? Or have their relationship to financial institution is precarious because the financial system in our country is broken in a lot of ways, et cetera. And so we're working with a couple of partners to do that fund distribution. An interesting thing we're learning about is for a lot of folks with different kinds of benefits, they're managing so much at any given time, right? They're managing their veterans benefits. They also know how SNAP is functioning and have to manage that budget every month, sometimes twice a week, depending on where you are in the state or what state you're in, et cetera, et cetera. For disabled folks in particular who have SSDI or SSI benefits, we found that as much as we can push funds in an ABLE account, ABLE, which is a special kind of financial product that allows disabled folks to retain their funds, right, without their SSI, SSDI being cut, which is a big problem, a big issue. So getting the benefits cliff essentially is like, you get more money, but then you get less money. Like you earn more money, but then you lose benefits that you need, and then you end up being worse off than you were. So didn't quite answer your question. I think that for us, the debit card has been a really important and really great solution for folks who have precarious relationships with banking institutions. Some of those folks are also have these other benefits you described in the question, and not always the case.
So Emily Garvey's asked a question around partnership organizations working with teaching artists and districts to support their work and educators more thoroughly. And I'm going to probably not frame that right, but I think this is going towards the idea of third-party sort of organizations who may be sort of working as community-based partners in these sort of GBI type of pilots. And any sort of best practices you found from working with those community-based organizations who may be in support of this work.
Can I see or Mallory, were you going to take it?
Go ahead.
And I'm not sure, I was going to see if you could, I'm not sure I quite absorbed the question well.
Yeah, I'm still absorbing the question too. I don't know if other CareLab folks want to chime in.
In terms of partnership in general with organizations, I feel like from the examples that we looked at for this, that the organization, as Maura mentioned in a previous answer, can really be the liaison to understanding the community more directly and being able to kind of navigate around some of the requirements to not be able to ask specific questions of other grant applicants. So I think that the school partnership, I think, definitely makes that more complicated because you're getting into a different territory. Oh, you're responding to the prompt. I see. Well, then I think in some ways, Emily, we really see that this is something we want you to take on in your own work, because it's something that we all want to understand more deeply, but that generally I really see the partnership with local organizations as being key to making the work happen.
Thank you. I think Jill from Cleveland also has a question about if you're familiar with GBI or other types of pilots in red states and sort of what the specific learnings have been in those kind of particular political contexts.
I can maybe not speak to the learnings, but I know if you just look at the Mayors for Guaranteed Income, which we can drop the link in the chat again. They have a list of all the mayors that have joined that group, and some projects are active, some are not. But I know that I think Mayor of Houston, so Texas is in there. I mean, that is, like a big city in a red state. I don't know if it's a blue city, maybe it's a blue city, maybe it's purple. I don't really know. Mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, and the Mayor of Jackson, Mississippi are also part of that coalition, just as an example. So there are, at least at the mayor level, there are folks, elected officials in red states. They're bigger communities, so cities. I know less about more rural communities in red states. That might be something others know about, but there's a start.
Building off of that, Mallory, Roxana, and maybe this goes to the example Johanna was using. You talked about the SARA bill being introduced bipartisan. I think if I'm understanding Jill's question, what's behind it is, are there particular strategies to more conservative political environments that serve to advance either workforce or GBI policies? Have people found and actually that's probably true. New York is not an entirely blue state also. So how do you position and strategize within those more conservative political environments to advance either the guaranteed income or the creative workforce initiatives?
Such an exciting, compelling question for all the reasons. I mean, I think for at least Creatives Rebuild New York's program, the call is still out, right? We're in process, and we absolutely see it. Even though we're doing these two programs, a big part of our work, because we're short term, is to think about policy and advocacy in bigger ways. Like, what are the inroads that need to be made, that can be made while we have this precious time and this really a lot of funding to get a lot of people the money that they need. Some of the things we've heard from other folks in guaranteed income space, folks like the Jane Family Institute, who are a research organization who we've worked with a bit, and we're also part of our think tank of advisors. I also dropped folks at UPenn operate the Center for Guaranteed Income Research. There's also a cash lab at NYU, and a lot of these folks who've been in conversation with us have said that being able to operate a program like this in rural parts of the country is going to be able to give us a lot of data to do different kinds of advocacy. There's also there's some articles I've read that show that guaranteed income and cash as a different way of organizing our social benefits system plays really well in red states, which I find really, really fascinating. I don't know what to do exactly. I don't have the whole plan of what we're going to do with that, but there is some preliminary data that shows us that's guaranteed income specifically, or cash payments in lieu of, or differently than our benefit system. I think the work ahead is still about seeing artists as workers, right? And in our economies, in blue places and red places, et cetera, because we know that hasn't been quite secured actually in all of our policy and organizing work.
I just want to add one more thing. It's kind of a broader strategy thought, which I think it kind of transcends the specific topic of guaranteed income or basic income, which is something you said, Mara, which is I think more of like a political and organizing tactic. To get the lay of the land of the context that you're operating within, right? So if it's a red state, and what is their energy around, what are people thinking, excited about, and if it is getting people back to work writ large, that's a thread to pull and to frame this kind of overlap of artists getting back to work, and I think that general strategy, you'll hear about that if you join us in 2 weeks when we talk about artists and residents in government. That's a strategy that CareLab generally recommends and deploys, is really kind of building off where there is need and thinking about those sort of Venn diagrams of proving the point, and then weaving in the benefits of specifically supporting artists in the arts as you move through the process. But sometimes you don't necessarily start there as a strategy. That's one way that I've seen that be successful.
I mean, the other thing I would sort of bring up, and our last session was really around the workforce development infrastructure, but that is also undergoing a fairly large sea change. Both the WIOA Act is being reauthorized right now, as we sort of talked about in our last session, and even and I've worked in 2 very red states before as a government worker. Even in those spaces, I think you'll find the workforce agencies are dealing with the data of the underlying labor demographic shifts in their own states. And regardless of the political context, the fact that the labor workforce is changing so dramatically is actually sort of creating spaces in some of these workforce agencies to begin shifting. So not to to continue to reinforce the sort of GBI side of this, but I do think there is momentum in the workforce space about readjusting to the current labor market and some of these underlying wage inequities that we're talking about here. Like, because the issue is artists are just a manifestation of a whole larger system of like labor inequities, and artists have some very specific needs, but they're part of a larger labor conversation in this country, which I think is in a moment right now, right? So to your point about where you get political traction, I wouldn't completely discount some of the underlying labor conditions in these states that are heavily rural, because I think that they have to address them as well.
One other, one, I wanted to lift up Kathy Shea from the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture offered a couple of great examples, both the Hope Corps sort of creative workforce model and the Public Art Bootcamp, which is a great model to get emerging artists into working in the public realm. So shout out to Kathy, go Seattle. And then Mallory, I wanted to pull on something you brought up as an example from, you mentioned it in the San Francisco model, which is about organizing communities of practice. I should have said at the top of this program that Care Lab, in addition to being today's hosts, who we're so grateful for, we're also co-designers of this program with a handful of other folks. And we talked in the co-design process about the importance of communities of practice. A core part of this work is the cohort, that the national cohort of practice that is meeting. They're with us right now. Hello, cohort. And they are going through all of these sessions as well and meeting in the in-between weeks. And I wonder where you've seen communities of practice both inform and come out of some of these models. And maybe, Mara, that'd be an interesting thing for you to answer. You're in it, right? You're like partway in your work. How much did those communities of practice inform Creatives Rebuild New York, and how much are they an outcome of or a part of the work as it moves forward? So I guess to either of you, Mallory, Roxana, or Mara, I'd be curious about that communities of practice piece.
Profoundly. I'll go to the latter part of your question. How do communities of practice, and what the other thing I took away from what you said, Randy, is just relational ways of working. How did that impact what we did? And I would say profoundly. We began with a think tank, right? Which is maybe a little bit of a boring phrase nowadays, but we were tanking and we were thinking in big, meaningful ways. That they were facilitated sessions, right? We were thinking about big things like, what does the solidarity economy mean for artists, and how can they be part of it? What is the moment where funding for an artist is transformational, right? Is it a $2,500 grant? No. Is it a $10,000 grant? Maybe. Is it guaranteed income? We hope. And I think leaning on both, I think the Art Place taught me this as well, and other kinds of work, that principled action requires each other, right? So it's not that it's something that just comes out of right after the fact, but it's it's baked in all along the way. So co-design, participatory process, trust-based work, like it's all, to me, it feels all part and parcel of why. It's the only way, in my point of view, to make this work good, meaningful, important, right? Especially when we know time is precious, right? We're in like you said, Jen, we're in a particular moment where more and more people are seeing, the curtain got pulled, and we all see that things need to change. And we can only keep that momentum by working in a together kind of way, in a community of practice in big ways, in the arts and outside of the arts, right? All of those things together.
3 cheers for relational practice.
I don't have anything really to add, other than from the research I've done, the recommendation is always to start with the community of practice. So, I think that that's a really great place to begin your experience in your process.
Thank you, Mallory, Roxana. And I think that was like the very first point Amanda made in the very first slide, which is center artists, engage with artists, build your community of practice. I think we're going to close with this question, very nuts and bolts question. Thank you to Emily for the question in the chat. Do programs rely on people to self-identify as artists, or are there eligibility tests? How do you handle that with 22,000 applicants, or how does YBCA handle that? Like, how do you vet whether the folks are artists or not, or do you just take folks at their word?
I'm gonna
Um,
give that to Mara.
I know. Call me. Who asked that question? Call me. Let's talk about it. It's super. Yes, we do some verification because we are accountable stewards of these funds, and we want to make sure they go towards the people that they're intended to go towards. And what's heartbreaking and true is that there are thousands and thousands of more people who need cash, right? Who may not identify or may not actually try to sustain their livelihood by being a practicing artist, who have a different definition of financial need, right, than we do, who maybe lived in New York State at some point, but actually no longer do or don't plan to, it's all tender and complicated. We work in partnership with other folks to do the verification we do. And the short story is that we're in a constant balance of working in a trust-based way while also being accountable to the intention of how these funds are distributed. There's a little bit of, I'm happy to share a blog post that we wrote about this for our program. I think most guaranteed income programs, the spirit is to not burden the participant. Whatever you can do that clears legal muster, right, and that gets people what they need is and does not burden them is the path forward. So that's always the principle that we're holding. But I'm happy to, offline, I'm happy to talk more with anybody at any time, because it's a fascinating conversation actually. And there's a lot that I think that both the guaranteed income and workforce development world actually, and any sort of social benefit programs need to contend with around verification specifically and eligibility. So whoever wants to do a deep nerdy dive, I'm very here for it.
That is such a great way to describe everything we're all doing here. In the spirit of relational and trust-based work, thank you for building a community of practice that fosters care and belonging. Care Lab, Mara, Creative Rebuild New York, you all are an inspiration. Thank you for being with us today. Excited to be with you again not next week, but in 2 weeks for the last of our public learning sessions about artists in residence. It's a very exciting topic, very, very of the moment. And we hope you'll join us there. I want to thank Estrella Escalín behind the scenes, choreographing the show. I want to thank Jen Cole, all of the co-designers of this project, and Grantmakers in the Arts, without whom we could not have done this. Thank you all for giving some of your time on a beautiful final day of August 2022. And yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks. We appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time.